everybody for being here. So again, my name is Ryan, and I'm going to run you through my project in the next 15 minutes and try to give you a little bit of background to understand where I'm coming from and what I did. So the first slide here is from 2015, and it is a Sierra Nevada bighorn sheep being released into the wilderness. It's part of a recovery program that my organization helped sponsor, and then we have the NPS biologist here carrying it out. So a little bit about background here. Where are we? So that's where Yosemite is in California. The bay is up here, I believe. And then this kind of shows the watersheds of the Sierra Nevada mountain range. They all are draining down to the Central Valley for the most part, joining the San Joaquin and the Merced River and the Tuolumne River. They're the major watersheds of Yosemite National Park. That's what the boundaries were drawn around originally. It's about the size of Rhode Island. And then that water goes into the Delta and into the San Francisco Bay. So our watershed really connects us up in the mountains all the way down to major urban areas. So a little bit closer up, different scale, the headwaters of the watershed. These are 3 products that were made by the physical sciences folks in NPS. They were working on a project called Chasing Snow, trying to figure out how climate change is going to affect the snow line. Rising snow line, more water, less snow. And so in Yosemite, we have all these stakeholders, and I work for these guys, the Yosemite Conservancy, and we're basically a cooperating partner of the Park Service. And we're just one of many players. I used to work for these guys, they're Nature Bridge, they're another cooperating partner of the Park Service, and they help the park fulfill their education mandate, and they're a strategic partner. They help the Park Service fulfill that part of their strategy. And then you have tribal groups, park visitors, concessionaire. We just started a new 15-year contract with the park concessionaire. We got local residents, gateway communities, we got the Park Service itself, academia. Project managers also play into this quite a bit. We'll get there. Agency structure, pretty big in Yosemite. These are their divisions. You got facilities, buildings, grounds, trails. Visitor resource protection is another word for like law enforcement, but also wilderness enforcement. Project management, they head up big capital projects. Resource management, science, physical sciences, vegetation, wildlife, interp and education. Whenever you go on a little walk, that's interp, but then also youth programs. Superintendent's office, that's the head honcho. He calls the shots. A little bit about the Conservancy. Got a long history, started in the 1920s. First cooperating partner of the Park Service. We helped them build the first museum. It was the Yosemite Museum. And then slowly they transitioned to more programmatic things and became the Yosemite Natural History Association. In the 80s, a lot of people were looking at Yosemite and just really were seeing that there was a lot of work to be done. Meadows were trashed, the park wasn't doing their mandate to take care of the resource. So they started the Yosemite Fund to raise money. And so they gave, I think in their time before they merged, tens of millions of dollars. And then now these have blended together into the Yosemite Conservancy, and that was in 2011. And so what my project kind of looks at is, uses this lens of social network analysis, so network theory, to see how these have blended together to form the Conservancy, because each one of them kind of came with their own bias. And so this tool lets us examine how stakeholders interact, and this is just one scale of the application that you could use it, so you could also apply it on other scales in the park to understand how resources are being allocated. So it really matters how those two groups are functioning together, because they're allocating so much money every year that it has an impact on the physical environment. So 300 projects totaling $90 million. We like to say, you can't go anywhere without seeing the work of Conservancy donors. And this is where I fit in. I work on this annual grants, work under the grant director. So about every year we're managing 30 projects that are around $4 million. Some of them are vegetation research. We got an owl survey. Both these are kind of looking at the effects after the rim fire, which was a major burn. Same with the spotted owl. Acid climber, one of my favorites. because I love rock climbing, but I also think it's a fascinating interdivisional partnership. You got this guy, Eric Bissell. He is a protection ranger. He's in law enforcement, but he's doing interpretation work. So he's like crossing these boundaries within the Park Service as well, which sounds great from the inside, but actually creates a lot of conflict within the Park Service. Real quick, this is kind of the breakdown for the last 2 years of where that money's gone to those divisions. Lots of facilities, lots of trails, interp, protection, project management, not as much. Resources is a big one, superintendent's office. We should have given more in 2016. Politically, that was a bad idea, I think. You gotta keep the superintendent happy. So let me just check my time. Okay. So this is just one kind of model of how all these things fit together. I told you about a little bit about the watershed. That's the natural ecosystem. That's the ecology here. We talked about the social with the stakeholders. And my project is just focusing on one little piece of it right now. And so we are kind of part of this nested institutions that helps shape these management practices, then that impact the local ecosystems, but they also move out and then impact the landscapes and the larger scales as well. Back to that adaptive cycle, and so the way to think about the adaptive cycle is in any given place, in Yosemite, if you have all these different organizations, you might have one organization that's down here that's moving small and fast through these. You might have a medium-sized one that's moving at a different speed through these. And then you might have the one that's moving the largest and the slowest. And you could look at it, as that's the whole ecosystem up here moving at this pace. Or you might think like the Park Service is the largest system that's the slowest to change. They're celebrating their 100-year anniversary, and they've basically been the same for 100 years. Not really changed it. So there's all these different ways to apply the adaptive cycle. But what I'm interested in is kind of creating policy windows for a new style of resource management, one that's more collaborative and not just focused on the federal agency. And these are some ways that you do it, and they sound really simple, but in the professional world, especially within federal agencies, these things are really hard to happen. Dialogues, mobilizing networks across scales, defining a problem. There's lots of rules about how problems can be defined, public scoping methods, but then really how they're implemented really determines how effective they are. Collaborative learning, a lot of these kind of happen with my organization being able to influence the problem definition because we're the ones who are going out and doing the heavy lifting of raising the money, which some people say is special interest, but you could also look at it as you got a voice for 30,000 small donors who are giving this money because they love the park. And it helps create public awareness. So those are the tools that I'm trying to use. And the way I started this was, how could I apply these, is by doing a little bit of research. And so I asked this question of, does the network structure reflect the 2011 merger of the Yosemite Fund and the Yosemite Association? And when I say network structure, I'm talking about two things: the density of the network and the centrality, and I'll define these things next. So a network is basically a bunch of nodes, which in this case are individual employees of my organization. And then I looked at the things that connect them. I asked them a question of how often do you communicate with this person? How often do you communicate with this person? And then you plug it into a program, and it gives you these nice visuals. So a really basic network with 5 nodes or 5 people, this would be like a highly central network. This one person, everyone has to go through them to reach everyone else. In this one, there's no central linking. You have to kind of go around if you want to link this person. And it's a little more complex when you get into centrality. This A is a good representation of someone with high betweenness centrality. They sit at an important nexus between the red subgroup and the blue subgroup. So if you need to move information or resources from this subgroup to this subgroup, you need to use this person. This person also would have a high score for centrality, in degree centrality of basically people going into them for information. See how they're linked to all these other people? And as example, that person, they would have a low score for centrality. So here's what I did. I asked the 24 staff members of my organization this question, and this is what we came out with. And you can play around with these all different ways, and turn off the nodes and turn off the nodes. I have all the individual labels off here, but what I do have is this color code theme that we started at the beginning. We have the Yosemite Association in yellow. So those are the kind of programmatic people that run educational programs in my nonprofit. And then in the Yosemite Fund, the blue, those are the people who are doing that fundraising, raising that money, and then giving it to the park. And then in the green, we have the Park Service. In orange, we have our board members. And then purple, the consultants. Okay, so you're starting to see a little bit of subgroup here with the Yosemite Fund and the association. But the best part about this is that we can break it down into some numbers. So network density is total number of connections in your network that exist divided by the total number that could exist if every single person was connected equally. So the overall network density is 0.35. And then what we see within the subgroups is that within the fund, members connecting to themselves, they have a higher density. So why is that, I wonder? And in the Yosemite Association, they have an even higher internal density than the overall network density. So, knowing a little bit about the Yosemite Association, again, they were the ones that started as the Yosemite Natural History Association. They run a lot of diverse programs all over the park, so internally they require a lot of communication to make their work happen. The fund, they are actually in San Francisco. They have their small little office, and they are purely a development office for the most part. They are raising that money every single year. And so we can see they're not really reaching out to these other people. Even though we're all in the same organization now, it falls off to 0.2 or 0.19. And then for Yosemite Association people reaching out to the fund people, it's about the same. So this is evidence that even despite this merger in 2011, we still internally have these divisions. And this, again, it connects back to the resource because in our network, how these little dots are communicating with each other then is going to radiate out and affect the Park Service. And the Park Service are the ones on the land affecting the ecosystem. Thank you. So here are some of the scores for individual employees. And basically, I wanted to find out who were those people that it was important to identify so that we can start bridging some of those gaps between those subgroups. And so I've color-coded them again here. And we can see it's somewhat of a blend of influential people. And then this is the node sizes, a little bit larger for the score. The outdoor adventure coordinator has this really high between the score, and the grants director and the GM. And this one should actually be a little bit larger. But so what I found out is that these two are kind of my key people who we can leverage to kind of bridge that gap between those two groups again. So finding that link between your two subgroups. And then this was the in-degree centrality. Let me skip a little through that. We run out of time. And so does the network structure reflect the 2011 merger of the Yosemite Fund and the association? Yes. So what? Who cares? Back to my original point, we want to create dialogues. We want to mobilize networks across scales. And this is really going to then shape how we define problems. And when we talk about defining problems, it's what resource issues on the land in Yosemite are going to get the benefit of that funding. And so it's the network structure reveals a little bit about the values of the organization. And so these are some of the things that my recommendations that are being considered within the organization, and how these will help create new policy windows. And this is just another project that I want to do later with social network analysis, climbing management plan. And this is just a cute picture of a fox from 2015. Question?
Would you mind going back to your density results slide for just a moment?
This one or the density, you say?
Can you go up that one right there?
Yeah.
So can you explain to us why from fund to Yosemite Association, why that's 19, and from Yosemite Association to fund it's 0.17? In other words, why are those two numbers different?
Yeah, that's a good question. So when you set up your data, you have everyone's name here, and you fill it in with their responses to everyone else that's listed here. So it's directional, if that makes sense. It's what person A, this marker's horrible. So what person A said about A is not really that interesting, but what A said about B, their frequency could have been 3, but what B said about A could be 2.
So it means that one organization is reaching out more to the other, but there's no response.
Exactly.
Or less response.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Thanks.
Follow-up question about this slide here. Can you think of a situation in which it'd be healthy for the organization to have this level of division, especially for people on the funding side, where maybe they need that separation?
Yeah. Yeah, it's actually a huge part of resilience theory is that you have a diversity of opinion in a decision-making process. So the fact that this density number is low is not necessarily seen as a bad thing, because that means that you have a diversity of perspectives present within your organization. If this value was really high, 0.8, 0.9, that would mean everyone thought kind of the same thing because they were sharing the same information. So it's not necessarily a bad thing that we have these divisions, but we want to be able to use them strategically. So we want to manage them to, how can we harvest the knowledge of the fund for the benefit of this subgroup and vice versa. That's kind of what we want to do. And we're in a strategic planning process, so right now we can kind of set those goals of like, okay, so how do we incorporate more project information into our programming to make our programmings more rich with understanding about this current research that's happening.
Can you infer anything about the organization's structure? Like, it was more hierarchical from this, or more decentralized in how the communication is happening?
Yeah, definitely. Because if you were to go off the org chart, and just maybe rank people in their importance, you wouldn't really put the grants director above the CEO, or the CFO is not even on this part. So kind of what it tells you is that you have a leadership that's willing to let the people under them have a lot of autonomy and influence, that they're not making everything go through them, which would kind of be like a classical agency structure, is that everything has to go through the division chief, and then all the division chiefs have to go through the superintendent, which is what our partner is how they work in the Park Service for the most part. And so we are able to kind of be a different voice within that system. Does that make sense?
I have a question that's fully outside the scope of your project, but I'm interested in how this speaks to it, because there's a lot of tension surrounding these partnering organizations with agencies, and those range from concerns of dissemination of resources, that they're not going equally, or that they're not being received where they need to be, or to the extreme of private takeover of public lands. And so I'm interested to how this idea of networks and people working together in between these groups speaks to some of those concerns around public-private partnerships.
That's a great question, and it is kind of beyond the realm of this, but it's very much a part of my day-to-day job. And it's a big question. And what it really is a partnership. The park kind of comes up with the projects that they want sponsored, and then they give us a menu, and then our grant review committee decides which ones to fund. So in that way, we are going off the park's priority. But they get mad even if we don't follow the prioritization lists, you know, word for word, because we have our own values. And you know, it just depends kind of on what side of the line you stand, but really I think we need just more collaboration to better understand each other, and that's a lot of what my role is as a project coordinator, to bridge that gap. And you know, the Park Service internally, they're changing in terms of their influence of outside money. You know, they've partnered with Subaru kind of on their own. The money comes through us as a pass-through, but they cultivated the relationship with Subaru for the Zero Landfill campaign. So after years of no money from Congress, they kind of threw their hands up and said, hey, we'll kind of go somewhere we've never gone before and partner with the corporations. And so that's kind of the start of a long answer. So that's it. Thanks.